has been given, or man has taken?
Procreate.
Procreate is one, being a creator like God. That was given after the fall, or maybe before the fall. We don't know. It doesn't say. What's the other one? What's the big one?
Knowledge of sin.
Choice is a better. Knowledge of sin is not a good, in my opinion, a good answer, but that's okay. I mean, that's theological, right? Because I have to define sin and other things. The true thing is free will. The ability to make decisions that are independent of God. So the two big ones are procreation, that is being a creator, and the ability to make independent choices outside of God. This is huge. But that, okay, what is God? This is the image of God that man has been given, apparently. And I say apparently because we'd have to do probably a 12-week study on what does it mean when it says image. Because in Hebrew, remember, Hebrew is what kind of language? Very euphemistic. Very euphemistic. What I want you to see, though, is something very interesting. Is it euphemistic to divide God into three parts, naming the parts spirit, basically God, spirit, and logos? Is that euphemistic? That ain't very euphemistic. What is euphemistic is calling it Elohim with a singular verb. That's euphemistic. Because they're telling you something. What a powerful thing they're telling you, right? I'm using as a culture, I'm using improper grammar to express a complex idea. That's about as euphemistic as you can get. You can't get any more euphemistic than that. And not only that, to have God being absolutely non-anthropometric and man being totally non-theometric, I guess, godlike. And then calling man in the image of God, how euphemistic is that? That is incredibly euphemistic. Because it allows you to tell something about the nature of man by reflecting the nature of God, when yet your culture believes that there is nothing that can be the same between the two. This is powerful stuff. So what we get is we begin with Nafesh, we begin with man as body and Nafesh, that's it. And God being Elohim with Ruach and Amar. We end up at the end with Sarx, Tzuke, and Pneuma. Basically a Greek worldview. Which I told you, you got to study the Apocrypha to figure out how that happened. But in between, we got Saul getting the Ruach. And by the way, do you remember the two discerning documents? The two specific documents that changed the worldview in a different way. They're right here between Exodus and Saul. Two very important documents. One of them is so important that it's read on, it's the scroll read before the law on, is it Pentecost? I think it's Pentecost. Before Pentecost. Ruth. And Ruth came out of Judges. What did Ruth and Judges give them? Kinsman Redeemer. That's correct. Kinsman Redeemer, and Kinsman Redeemer leads to Messiah. However, to get real Messiah, you got to go to, basically Malachi talks a lot about it. You get a lot of it in the other documents, but you get touches, tastes. No real Messiah until Apocrypha, and out of the Apocryphal period we get pure Messiah. So Messiah, remember, Messiah is here. Messiah. Remember what Jesus told him? You look for a Messiah in every generation from 175 BC. Yeah.
You've made that statement several times. Did any of the other messiahs other than Christ profess to be God?
No, not that we know of. However, there's an implication if you declare yourself to be king in these cultures that you are implying that you are God. Remember the Roman emperors? Yeah. The Roman emperors were not so much taking up a new idea. They were simply accepting finally the idea that came from the Greek. What did the Greek kings set themselves up to be? Demigods. Demigods. And the idea that they could be actually gods came from Zoroastrianism and from the Far East, from the East, and that was infiltrating Greek thought. And then what did the Roman emperors finally do? They stated they were. Why did they state they were gods?
For control.
For control, because why? Well,
I said they wanted people to worship them.
I don't think they wanted them to worship them. I think they didn't believe in this stuff at all. They believed that they had reached the point of where they were atheistic or secularistic in their viewpoints. I think they thought it was just a facade. Because remember, I told you before, one of the biggest problems for the Greeks was when they began their explorations, and the Greeks began to see that there were other gods. It wasn't Zeus over everything. They had Isis and others, and you had, Theodocles trying to, or Herodotus trying to put them together to fix it. But you can't fix a vessel that's busted, see? And so as they saw that all these other cultures had other gods and stuff, I think that was part of their problem. But eventually what you got in this worldview of thought is, okay, I'm taking over all these nations, and these other nations expect their king to be a god. And so the Roman emperor said, well, I'm a god, see? Which really irritated the Jews, right? A lot. Among some other groups, but yeah, see? So in any case, what we get is, remember, we get this kinsman redeemer idea, and now, how should we see things reflected in thought? What documents are we going to see this reflected in? This change of cultural ideas, of theological ideas, of ideas about God and about man. Where are you going to find them? In the Psalms. Bingo. So, let's look at the Psalms. Let's look at 105 and 106. The reason 105 and 106 will become obvious to you, to the most casual observer. So let's look at it. I want to read the whole thing.
Are the Psalms in order?
The Psalms are in, well, what order do you mean?
Chronological order?
Well, I'm going to answer your question euphemistically. Look at 105. 105. Give thanks to the Lord, call on his name, make known among the nations what he has done. So number one, what do we look at in a psalm? The first thing we look for.
Theme statement.
What's that?
That first statement was a theme statement?
It's a synopsis. The first is a synopsis, and we always look for what form. What is their poetic form? Parallelism. So we look, number one, parallelism. Look what it says. Give thanks to the Lord, call his name, make known among the nations what he has done. This is the first parallel structure. Now, I didn't parse it for you in Hebrew because I didn't think we needed to for these two psalms. So I want to go through them. They're kind of long. This is the synopsis. So what should we look for as a synopsis? We should see what? Give thanks, call on his name, make it known among the nations. And look at the L-O-R-D, capitalized. That means it is Yahweh. I haven't explained this to you guys yet. I should. Adonai is a small L. Large L-O-R-D is Yahweh. So this is using the word Yahweh, which is the I am. I want to read the whole thing, but sing to him, sing his praise to him, tell him his wonderful acts. Each of these is parallels. Glory to his holy name. Look to the Lord, his strength. Seek his face. Remember his wonders, his miracles, his judgments. Descendants of Abraham, his servant, O sons of Jacob, his chosen ones. He is the Lord our God. And God here is Elohim. Whenever it's a capital G, it's Elohim, so gods. His judgment are on all the earth. He remembers his covenant forever, the word he commanded for 1,000 generations. Which covenant do you think? He's going to tell us tonight. The covenant he made with Abraham, the oath he swore to Isaac. He confirmed it to Jacob as a decree to Israel as an everlasting covenant. I'll give you the land of Canaan, the portion you will inherit, etc., etc. Goes on and on. sold Joseph as a slave. They bruised his feet with shackles. His neck was put in irons. Okay, on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And Egypt, we get the last thing we get is the Egypt. And at the very end it says he gave them the, this is 44, he gave them the lands of the nations. They fell heir to what others had toiled for, that they might keep his precepts and observe his laws. Praise the Lord. Okay, number one. It is so easy to figure out when this was written. It is so easy to figure out when this was written. If you guys read it, if you didn't read it beforehand, you'll have to trust me or have to grab to it right now. Number one, there is obviously no mention of who in this thing. Of whom? What's that? Who does it not mention?
Saul.
There's no David, there's no Saul, there's no kings. It does mention Moses, and it does imply the Exodus. And they go to the promised land. So where would this fit?
Very beginning.
Well,
That'd be Moses.
Sometime after 1250, but before 1000.
someplace right here, right? Because it doesn't mention kings, and it doesn't mention David, it doesn't mention Saul or any of those guys. I mean, this is so easy. Is this an early or late psalm? This is an early psalm. Not as early as you can get. I'm going to show you a really early psalm tomorrow. A really early one. Whether it was borrowed, or next week, I'll show you one that's really early borrowed psalm. Whether it is copied, whether it's, I'm going to show you with parallel to Egyptian literature. It is probably an Egyptian psalm that is borrowed next week. But this one, obviously, I can set it. Beautiful setting. This is obviously Judges period, post-exilic, or post-Exodus. It doesn't mention anything about any of those other things, and it's a very positive psalm. The latest observations, the establishment of Israel, but not as a kingdom. As I said, no kings. No mention of the covenant of Moses. But it ends about the law. The focus is on Abraham and the Abrahamic covenant, which also will tell you something about early Israel. Early Israel was focused on what covenant, obviously? The Abrahamic covenant, and not necessarily on the Mosaic covenant. Early kingdom, likely Judges period. Who is this? Who wrote this? Doesn't say. Speaks about Moses and Aaron, doesn't mention the author. Likely someone who had early experience. Unlikely to be a priest. Doesn't sound like a priestly type thing.
So
Why?
why do they stick it way back in the back of Psalms instead of at the beginning? So they're not chronologically.
Oh, we'll get to that in a second. We'll get to that in a second. It's 105. It's 105, but this sure sounds pretty early, right? Matter of fact, when we looked at Psalm 1, I like Psalm 1 because Psalm 1 is a very early psalm in terms of thought. Thought. But Psalm 1 is obviously not. Remember I told you there's indications in Psalm 1 that it was talking about what area? Babylon. Because you don't find irrigation ditches and trees around irrigation ditches in Israel or in Egypt. You find them in Babylon. See? And right, this is really classical Babylonian form. Yeah.
Given the time period where you just put this, why would Abraham, the Abrahamic covenant, be important, not Moses? Since at this time period it was, they were looking for the promised land.
Because they were the children of Abraham. Moses, as a fact, there are great indications that the Mosaic covenant and the Torah became less important, very much less important, because what did they finally discover in the temple, guys? Remember Josiah? What did they find? They finally found the law. Okay. If it's the most important thing for you, do you lose your Torah? No. These guys lost their Torah. The whole thing. So much so that somebody rummaging through the temple finally found a copy. Hey, king, guess what we found? And guess what? The priests aren't supposed to be stealing from us, etc., etc. Yeah.
But the Torah, the first thing in the Torah says you should have no other gods, and they were busy having many other gods, so they didn't want to know about the Torah.
No, you don't want about the Torah thing. Forget about it. Forget about it. Yeah. I'm just, okay, look, what is our view? What is our Sunday school view? From 6th grade.
They
They had the Torah in their hands the whole time, and they were always following it, and that was it. But what do we know? They never did it, and they didn't even have it. It took to Josiah to find it again. I mean, that would be kind of like, not having the Old Testament, New Testament documents, for like 1,000 years, and all of a sudden somebody digs it out of a manure, thing, right? And says, hey, look what I just found, right? So maybe that's a miracle in itself. But the thing we've got to rekey in our brains, right? We want to believe what? We want to put our viewpoints over the top of what history is. And what I'm telling you is, let's just take history for what it says and not read anything into it. Let's just look at it for what it is. And that's what I'm saying. If you're going to look at it the way it is, you've got to start here. And you've got to recognize that what happened to the views of man and God across these thousands of years? They changed. Now, theologically, I'm going to make a theological statement here, guys. I don't usually make a theological statement, but from a theological standpoint, who was interested in making sure that people got the right view?
God.
As a matter of fact, isn't it interesting the New Testament's written in Greek and not Hebrew? If it were in Hebrew, we'd be arguing today on what words meant like crazy. In Greek, we don't have to argue that much. We just ignore what it says, so that's okay. In any case, the who of speaking this is hard to tell. It doesn't look like a priest. What would a priest, if it were a priest writing this, what would the priest be mostly interested in?
Maybe?
Well, I'll give you the law, but what's a priest really most interested in? Sacrifice, because that's what pays his bills. He ain't paying the electric bill until he gets a sacrifice, right? He's waiting. His kids are starving until they get the sacrifice. So what you'll find in almost every piece, when you want to identify it as one that the priest wrote, look for sacrifice. Look for Torah. Look for Mosaic covenant. Because Mosaic covenant, in the Abrahamic covenant, did they have to sacrifice? No. They had to sacrifice in the Mosaic covenant. So if you see indications of Mosaic covenant and sacrifice, that's usually probably a priest. But
Lionel, real quick.
Yeah.
I mean, when you use the word had to, I mean, obviously Abraham did.
Oh, he did?
But it was voluntary. I mean, he was moved by, we don't have the rook yet, however you pronounce it, but what caused him to sacrifice?
That's a beautiful question. Why did everybody sacrifice? I mean, the whole world sacrificed. Well, every time, sacrifice, we learned from Cain and Abel that vegetables ain't sacrifice. Okay? Now, whether that's a statement of the ancient world or what, I mean, really, that is a pagan statement. Because why did the ancient world sacrifice?
Because meat was so valuable.
Well, meat was valuable, but the most important thing about meat was you were killing a living being. A living being. Fish were not counted in sacrifice. It had to be something that had red blood. And so every culture got this idea that when they were killing some animal, that they had to make reparation to the gods. And so the sacrificial process was making reparation to the gods because of their actions. Again, you can build an enormously beautiful theological thought about this. But why did Abraham sacrifice? Because it is a pagan, it is a pure religious worldview in the ancient world that when you take life of an animal, you have to placate the gods. Because, and even the Genesis. Okay, Genesis. After the fall, the first thing God did was he sacrificed an animal. And he made, all right, guys, you're all adults here, I don't need kids. The Jewish thought is that what he gave Adam and Eve were their pubic hair. That's what it means. Okay? If you don't believe me, talk to your rabbi, go to the Talmud, look in the Talmudic writings. As a matter of fact, That is why in Jewish thought, when a boy becomes 13 with pubic hair and a girl becomes 12 with pubic hair, then they have reached the age of accountability in Jewish thought. Because, and Jews don't believe in original sin at all. They believe you actually become accountable at those ages, and the indication is pubic hair, because that's what it says in Genesis. So Adam and Eve were born without pubic hair, or didn't have any pubic hair at all until that point. And that's the reason, okay, according to Jewish thought. Now you can figure out anything you want, but it also is very important to note that after they did wrong, the first step that God did was to sacrifice. Now God did not placate himself, and this is incredibly important thought. Why did God sacrifice for them? I don't know. But God can't placate himself. But obviously the spilling of blood was necessary. It's so necessary that every adult human being carries that image on their body, just like the rainbows. I mean, we don't like to talk about these things, right? We're puritanic in our thoughts until you watch the internet or go to TV. But, we're puritanic in our thoughts in church, but yet we should understand these things because they are, according to Jewish thought and according to the Bible, self-evident, right? We got to get to 106. The what? Let me see if I got any what's on 105. No failures in Israel. God is all-powerful, and Israel is transcendent with no faults. And remember the beginning. Give thanks to the Lord, call on his name, make known among the nations what he has done. 106. First, praise the Lord, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. Okay? Who can proclaim the mighty acts of the Lord, can declare his praise, and by the way, it's Yahweh. Blessed are they who maintain justice, who continuously do what is right. Remember me, O Lord, when you show favor to your people. Come to my aid. Was there any personals, me's, or I's at all in 105?
No.
None at all. That I may enjoy the prosperity of your chosen ones, that I may share the joy of your nation, enjoy the inheritance of giving praise. We have sinned. Was there any sins going on in 105? None. Were any we's in 105? Nope. Communal sin, not individual. Problem of Jewish thought. When our fathers in Egypt, they gave no thought to your miracles. They did not remember your many kindnesses. They rebelled by the sea, the Red Sea. Wait a sec. Before, everything was positive, right? Now it's all negative. He saved, yet he saved them for his name's sake, to make his mighty power known. He rebuked the Red Sea, dried up. He saved them from the hand of foe. Oh, was there any saving going on before? No. The waters covered their adversities, not one survived. They believed his promises, sang his praise. 17, the earth opened up, saw death. Let's see. He said he would destroy them. 24, they despised the pleasant land, did not believe his promise. They grumbled their tents, did not obey their God. Ooh, this is really different than 105. So he swore to them with uplifted hand he would make them fall in the desert and make their descendants fall among the nations and scatter them throughout the land. They yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor, ate sacrifice offered to lifeless gods, provoked their Lord to anger. But Phinehas stood and intervened, and the plague was checked, and credited with righteousness. The waters of Meribah, 39, they defiled themselves by what they did, by their deeds they prostituted themselves. Therefore the Lord was angry with his people and abhorred his inheritance. He handed them over to nations, and their foes ruled over them. Their enemies oppressed them. They subjected them to their power. Many times he delivered them, but they were bent on rebellion, and they wasted away in their sin. But he took note of their distress, and he heard their cry. For their sake he remembered his covenant, and out of his great love he relented. He caused them to be pitied, but all who held them captive. Save us, O Lord, and gather us from the nations, that we may give thanks to your holy name and glory in your praise. Praise be the Lord, the God of Israel, everlasting, everlasting. Let the people say amen. Praise the Lord. All right, wait.
Right towards the end.
Late after. This is Ezra and Nehemiah, guys. Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra and Nehemiah. This is so obvious. We can put this, look, the 105 Psalm and the 106 Psalm. This answers the question, doesn't it? Are they chronological? No way. We get a psalm that should be way at the beginning, and we get a psalm that should be way at the end. Right? Look at the thought that has changed. There's no I's. There's no we's in 105. There's all I's and we's. And by the way, the first psalm, okay? The first psalm, what is the viewpoint the theological cultural viewpoint of Psalm 1 and the 105th Psalm.
Nation building?
What are you saved from? What is salvation? It doesn't use the word save at all. What is saved? Save in the 105 Psalm and save in the number 1 Psalm is saved from what?
The wicked, it says the wicked will perish.
You're saved from what? The physical world. Physical. Is there any spiritual salvation? All right. Now, what is the salvation in 106? Is there any spiritual salvation in 106? None at all. It's physical, saved from what?
Worshiping idols.
It's physical. No. They're brought back to the original land. Is there anything about saved from Sheol in there?
No.
Is there any saved from being bad? No. What happens to the bad guys? They get deported. Right? If you're good, you're what? Brought back. What I'm trying to show you is, here, the physical salvation is to have food and drink and your land. Here, in the 106th Psalm, the idea is the physical, to be saved from your enemies, to be brought back to your land. Okay, just looking at 105 and 106, is there any transition to spiritual salvation anywhere in here? None. Now, I'm not going to tell you that we're not going to find stuff that indicates spiritual salvation or ideas of theological ideas, cultural ideas about salvation. But I already told you who obviously wrote these two. They don't look like priests wrote these to me, because there's no words about sacrifice, there's no words about Mosaic covenant, and there's very little about Torah. At the worst, the Torah is something you broke, and guess what? You got deported. But now you're finally trembling home. See? The point I want to make is this. These two Psalms represent great historical examples, because you can place them in time. Bang! Right there. And you can see who wrote them, pretty much. You can get the idea of who wrote them. Do you see how much you can dig out of these Psalms? And we haven't even begun to talk about, the implications or, what they might mean within a larger context. But simply pulling apart ideas from them to show us the historical wind and the historical thoughts. So, the next one I want you to look at, Psalm 51. Read Psalm 51. These aren't super long Psalms. This is maybe one of the earliest Psalms we have, okay? But look at Psalm 51 and see what's in it. Look at it from the standpoint of parallel structure. Look at it from synopsis body structure. See what you can gain out of it. See if you can figure out when, the who, the where, the hows,